Here outside the Aboriginal section, and what I'm interested in doing is not asking for a juxtaposition of scientific knowledge and Aboriginal knowledges, but taking on board the importance of the theme of Aboriginality and how it can be woven into a story about climate change, including the social context, bringing Australia in as the complex nation it is into having a concern about climate change. And I was wondering, David, how you see this kind of image of humans relating to each other and the landscape could connect with the broader mission of communicating climate change issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word is connect that you just used, because it's that connection. European or Western, if you like, economies and civilizations have tended to feel that their society was interconnected, but used the environment for their benefit, but didn't necessarily feel connected. They almost felt, well, the perception is almost above that. The connection between Aboriginal communities and their environment is much more one of connection, and that therefore probably more sustainable. Certainly much more aware of that. And so this issue of, if you like, connection, I mean now, in this context, connection between the fact that we can learn from all the different communities that make up Australia. It's not just that we have a European community, but we have a community that is made up of Australian Aboriginal population with a very close connection to the Australian landscape. But we also have Asian, Latin American, African and European communities here within us, that I think that connection and how we can recognise that we can learn is really important, because each of those will have a different both preconception of their relationship with the environment, and then also how to cope with change.
The story of their displacement is also told in there, and of the injustices done by the arrival of European people. They're all stories already told within this context. The most important issue here about climate change is whether we can tell these stories and all tie them in together. And already today, this walk around the museum, we've seen that almost every part of the museum has something we can learn, something we can apply that is relevant to the ongoing discussion about climate change. So I think museums we in particular have a lot of work to do to be able to mesh these stories in throughout the museum.
The custodial role of Indigenous people with Australia is seen as an important component of the wisdom that Australia needs to draw on in dealing with climate change. Well, that's easy to say, but how is it realised, and how is it integrated into a message which people can take hold of, and how these people are communicating Aboriginal knowledge. So you've got a Life on the Darling. It doesn't say very much about the scientific, well, the material conditions or whatever. And the emphasis isn't on the change. And of course, for Aboriginal people, there's the huge social change, the dispossession, even if the landscape was the same.
What we were doing here is we were seeking to have an exhibition of pieces of art, and that in itself brings particular challenges in the level of interpretation that you might want to overlay on top of it. But also, this is a community that's linked by the Darling River in terms of their subject matter. It's also a contemporary community that's working now in New South Wales. We wanted to highlight, again, one of the less well frequently told stories about artists who are working in New South Wales. Because certainly if you're an overseas visitor, then you're more likely to hear about Western Desert artists or those sorts of things. And so I agree with you. I think there's lots of ways that you could take this. We didn't, in this particular instance, invite the artists to talk about their work or talk about living on the Darling now. We could do that. That would be one way of perhaps making that message more explicit. Another way of doing it would be perhaps to look at juxtaposing some of these artworks. So I think that's saying more about the challenges of using art to tell stories about climate change as much as using Indigenous art to tell stories about climate change. I think that the challenges are often the same. I'm interested though in what you said about Indigenous knowledge, and I think there are aspects that are not necessarily related to art and the production of art, that there are lots of ways that Indigenous knowledge might well be useful in looking at climate change, looking at changes in seasons, looking at changes in distribution of plants or animals and those sorts of things. And I think there are lots of ways that we as a museum are starting to think about how we might work with contemporary communities to draw upon more of that intangible knowledge.
With the video, we can't show it, but the twin structure of two videos, one by a scientist, the other by an Aboriginal elder.
Yeah.
So it's bringing the two perspectives. I felt that the Aboriginal perspective was not really done well enough. It was just a bare narrative. It wouldn't grab anyone. It would be, unfortunately, inviting a judgment that the Aborigines have nothing to say. So the scientist the images backed up his story. The female elder was just repeating an Aboriginal myth, and you couldn't tell watching that how that was explaining anything. And so,
but there are some wonderful, recent documentaries demonstrating, if you like, the Indigenous knowledge of the environment and their closeness to and awareness of the environment, water, weather, and the sky. I mean, some fantastic examples, and in fact, their Dreamtime stories provide, if you like, a very great oral history of, if you like, the evolution of their culture over very long periods of time that certainly predates the written European history very much, but also indicates a much greater awareness of the implications of, if you like, the Indigenous activities and implications on the environment.
Yeah. In fact, if we walk up this a little bit further, we'll see a landscape with all the different Aboriginal seasons outlined in front of us, including what the activities were and how the climate dominated the activities of those seasons. Obviously, was the main thing for their life cycle.
Right. I'll be commenting on perhaps the underused opportunity of drawing on Aboriginal culture in the whole museum. But anyway, it's not. It's none of this is a criticism. This is just a kind of audit where we see how a new era can do even better. And that's in relation to an exhibit which is just a wonderful one. I just felt so good when each time I've gone through it. I felt really good.
Okay, this is the entrance to Yinalong Yinu, and again it's women's journey in the language of the Eora. I tried to weave the local language into a lot of our exhibitions here.
Yes.
And being a New South Wales museum, I tried to highlight New South Wales art and culture and heritage more so than anything else.
Yes.
However, when you look through here, you'll find that a lot of our objects do come from other parts of Australia. And this is something that we cannot help, if you know what I mean. So when you go through here, you're looking at the journey of 6 prominent Indigenous women from New South Wales, but we are also looking at the objects that have been created in this exhibition. They've all been created by women, And I think it's a really good counterpoint as to what's happening today with the current treatment of women in today's climate, if you know what I mean. Our first one was creating and nurturing, which is something that Indigenous women have done in the past, and they are still doing it. Although we've changed in so many ways with the evolution of time and technology, it still hasn't diminished the Indigenous woman's role for doing what she has done all her life for the upkeep of her family. Yeah, well, even this is a museum of technology. It's also a museum that highlights Indigenous technology. So when you look at the technology that has gone into the creating of some of our artefacts around here, there's a lot of science involved with that. So I don't see this being just an anthropological or an archaeological sort of thing, if you know what I mean, or ethnographical. Yep. It's how we've always used certain degrees of technology to bring about the types of lives that we have encountered, and that is knowledge of the climactic seasons and time and space and place, which would have been quite, an area where they would know about for thousands and thousands of years of living under such climates. And of course, at night time, the stars, where we read the stars and all those sorts of things, and we knew what was happening because we read the stars. So nighttime was very important. And with Indigenous women, the way they read the skies, especially at night, was an indicator of what was going to happen in 2 months' time, or what was going to happen in a week's time, or those sorts of things, if you know what I mean. So, and of course, weather, the elements and all that, they would have known when certain, weather changes were going to happen. We did not have just 4 seasons in Indigenous Australian society. We had about 8 to 12 seasons. And there has been evidence now that has been unearthed within the Northern Territory of different sort of metrics of weather patterns, and when certain animals were becoming fertile, when certain grasses were supposed to go, and when certain times of the year we held ceremony. And they were all associated with the changing of the elements.